Hello and welcome everybody to the Bald Man podcast. And today we wanted to talk a little bit about something different. We wanted to talk about nice guy syndrome, which is, I think, something that you and I have both dealt with in our past, maybe
Yeah,
still deal with a little bit. My definition of a nice guy, and then I'd love to get your take,
sure.
is a nice guy is somebody who on the surface seems like is very pleasant, very kind, very surface level nice, where they're very agreeable, but then they have this kind of bubbling anger, under the surface that oftentimes will kind of come to a boiling point where you will a lot of times see these nice guys have just complete blow ups at some point.
Sure.
Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think a nice guy is like this idea that you think you are nice, but the core tenets of what your actual belief is actually not nice. I think it comes from a sense of entitlement that I do X and then I will get Y. And I think that that is a flawed logic thinking because you don't always get what you want, right? And to think that you are entitled to have you know, a certain reaction based on, you doing a certain good deed, then you have to ask yourself, is that really a good deed if you're doing it expecting something in return?
Yeah, there's a book I think that you and I both
Hmm.
read called No More Mr. Nice Guy.
Yeah.
And if you are somebody who kind of struggles with this whole nice guy syndrome, I recommend it. One of the topics that always stuck out to me after reading that was what you were talking about,
Hmm.
which is the author calls it covert contracts,
Yeah.
where you tell yourself that because I'm doing something nice,
Hmm.
then whoever you're doing that nice thing for owes you something in return without you ever having communicated that to them. And
Sure.
so you're operating under this idea that, well, I'm doing all these nice things for people, expecting nice things to be done in return.
Hmm.
And a lot of times that leads to disappointment because you've never actually communicated to that person what it is that you really want.
Yeah.
And so you're constantly playing this game of disappointment where, okay, I've done all these nice things, I'm expecting all these nice things back. When that doesn't happen, you get discouraged, you get angry,
Hmm.
you start to lash out or start bottling all that up, and that's where I think the angry outbursts come from.
Yeah. And I think it can stem, it's like beyond just relationships. I mean, I guess it's beyond all romantic relationships. It can also stem into like the corporate life. I
Mhm.
found myself like within early on in my career, like if I do like so much for this company, then I deserve to have the raise. I deserve to have the promotion. I deserve to be manager. I deserve to be, a senior level, whatever. Um, and I think oftentimes, especially if you're a people pleaser, and I'm a recovering people pleaser, uh, oftentimes you get caught in this loop of like, well, if I do so much, then I will get noticed for my work, or if I do so much, I'll get noticed for my efforts. And that's not always the case. I often saw that the person that I thought was not doing nearly as much as I was, and even on like an empirical sense, that was the case. Um, they were the ones getting the promotion. They were the ones getting
Yeah.
the raises and the accolades. And I was like, so what do I need to do in order to, be noticed? And I think, growing up in a more um, reserved and conservative household, not politically, just like we were just very reserved and conservative, being more Asian. Oftentimes those unspoken contracts were always created, right? It's the my parent will never say sorry, but they will make me a sandwich, or make me a food, right? And that's how they say sorry. That's almost teaching you that that is how normal conversations and normal relationships is supposed to work, and that's not true.
Yeah, I think you've pointed out two of the big areas where that this comes into play: work, family, and then of course the other big one that you hear from a lot of guys, especially, is with women or in relationships. Right, they're
Hmm.
trying to build a relationship with a person they like, and they're doing all these nice things. Maybe they're constantly like picking her up and dropping her off places that she needs to go, or doing
Buying
favors
her
for.
lunch, but yeah,
Yeah,
grabbing
getting
her coffee.
lunch, paying for coffee, doing all these again, nice things. They seem like nice things on the surface, but then the expectation of that guy is that, okay, I've done all these 10, 20 nice things for this girl. Now she's going to like me. Now she's going to be in a relationship with me.
Yeah.
When in reality, you never actually communicated that that's what you want. You were just
Mhm.
operating again under these covert contracts.
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, those three areas is where that this really comes up. I'm sure, friendships as well is probably another
Hmm.
area. But so for a recovering, us recovering nice guys, I'm curious, what did you do to sort of get out of this pattern, and how did you recognize that you were maybe in this pattern?
Sure. Um, so I read No More Mr. Nice Guys sometime in like early on in my career after college. And it sort of resonated at the time. And I was like, I have some of this stuff, but I wasn't being honest with myself at the time. And uh, I had to get burned badly, multiple times for like a
Hmm.
majority of my life. Like, in romantic relationships, I would be really nice to them, and then, eventually, maybe way too late, I told them that I was romantically interested in them, and then they're like, "Oh, I thought you were just being nice."
Yep.
Uh, in which case, that obviously stung a lot. Or they would end up dating someone else, and it's like, wait, you and I have been like, pretty intimate, but it's not, it hasn't resulted in anything.
Hmm.
And again, I think it was just that. It's like I had created a something in my mind that it was something, it was going to manifest into something, but I hadn't ever told them or given them any hints outside of just being nice. And I think that comes from a sense of fear of rejection, fear that what your needs and desires aren't going to be worthy or worth being heard. Um, I think it all came to a head when my brother told me like that love is to be given and not to be expected in return. And I think something
Hmm.
about those words just really resonated with me, that all the things that I've been doing up until that point, I had expected something back in return. And that's not really love. That's not being nice either, because you are storing up the negativity in yourself or will explode it out later. And that's not nice. That, in fact, that is actually very cruel to
Yeah.
have expectations upon someone and not even communicate that those were expectations to begin with. And ever since then, I started trying to put everything through the lens of love is to be given. And then it makes things almost, it's almost liberating, because you start to think, well, uh, I just put it into the vacuum and expect nothing, and you free yourself from all those negative feelings that you store up because you don't build resentment about the situation.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. Are you?
Yeah.
I'm curious what you have. Yeah.
Do you think that you have to get burned at some point to kind of break um, that whatever it is that's preventing you from seeing that you're a nice guy? Do you think that you kind of have to get burned maybe a couple times before you recognize I need to maybe something's not working here?
Uh, I would hope not. I think that it's definitely the harder lesson to learn, to get burned. But if you can recognize that within yourself, then you're miles ahead of most people, because I think a lot of people have to put their hand to the stove to realize that it's hot.
Hmm.
Uh, and a lot of times, a lot of people are not even aware that they need to make change until it's no longer suiting them, whatever
Yeah.
action or habit that they're doing. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know,
Well,
what are your thoughts?
Well, yeah, hopefully, rather than you being the one to put your hand on the stove to learn that lesson, you can see someone else putting their hand on the stove and seeing the
Yeah.
reaction of how much it hurts, and maybe learn the lesson that others have learned before you have to do that yourself. But I'm with you. I mean, I learned a couple painful lessons myself where I definitely operated under these hidden contracts where I was doing lots of nice things, talking to, a person a lot, there being there emotionally
Hmm.
for this person, but never really setting the expectations that I am interested in taking relationship further.
Yeah.
And then coming to the hard realization that this, this woman in this case didn't, have reciprocal feelings. And yeah, learning that lesson, was painful at the time. And that was probably what opened my eyes to, what, this something's not working for me. And when I first read that book, the No More Mr. Nice Guy book, that really resonated with me because I instantly recognized these hidden contracts that I was operating under.
Hmm.
And I also recognized that I wasn't setting any boundaries really.
Yeah.
And I think part of maturing and growing up, becoming an adult, is recognizing that at some point you have to learn where to set boundaries. You have to learn how to set expectations for yourself and for others, because otherwise it's too easy to let yourself get pulled in different directions.
Yeah.
As we get older, we typically get a little busier and have more things going on. And if you don't clearly set those boundaries with your family, your friends, relationships, yeah, you're just going to get pulled in too many directions, get burned
Hmm.
out, and then you won't be able to do the things that you want to do for yourself or for others. And so it really ends up hurting everyone in the long run.
Where
So go
where do
ahead.
you think the it's a bad habit, right? Where do you think the habit of creating hidden contracts comes from?
It's probably a little different for everybody. I think for me, part of it was being the middle child and growing up as the peacemaker in my family. Being wanting to, I guess, please my parents, but also not wanting to have all the attention. I was kind of willing to kind of go along with, anything, and I was also trying to appease, my siblings who would kind of bicker and fight. And so I was kind of that cliche middle child. As I got older, I almost refer to it as like a survival mechanism, where being the peacemaker was my survival mechanism, where I could just be nice and try to like resolve conflict, and then that would be my way to like get people to like me, or at least to like get them to, you know not dislike me.
Yeah.
That was a huge fear for me, was to have somebody who disliked me.
Hmm.
So it was very much a defense mechanism. And I think for me, yeah, it definitely came from, you know, part of it definitely was my upbringing. Part of it might just be my natural, in my nature. But that would be the case for me. How about you? How about for you?
I guess kind of similar. Like I was the oldest child, but it was often pushed upon me that, I had to be a good older brother. Like almost like at least once a week I would probably hear it. And my parents were both working, and because of that, they weren't really around. And it wasn't until I got married that I started realizing, like, oh, I didn't learn a lot of EQ type of stuff. I learned a lot of how to be financially successful, but that's about it. you know.
Right.
Um, and because of that, I think they just didn't have the time, since they were both working a lot and traveling a lot. Um, I didn't learn the nuances of creating boundaries. I didn't learn the nuances of this is how you articulate your wants, needs, and desires. This is how you just, I guess, interact with other people and get them to like you. Um, I think kind of to the same effect, I ended up becoming that people pleaser because I just wanted to be the good son, right? And the good older brother. And that's all that, those were my only metrics of success, were to be well behaved. But being well behaved only teaches you how to, sacrifice your own needs and desires. Um, but it never teaches you how to get, your comfort for yourself, get your own needs met. Um, so then you end up in this weird amorphous like thing where you're just doing nice things for other people and then never get anything in return, and then you always feel like you're getting shafted. And maybe you are, maybe there are people that are taking advantage of you. But what metrics of success are you giving them to actually interface with you so that there can be a nice two-way street? You don't
Hmm.
that I wasn't doing any of that, so
Yeah.
yeah.
I think sometimes people do take advantage of you when they
Hmm.
not, and sometimes it's not even malicious or even conscious. They may just start getting to the point where it's, he's always fine with anything, so
Yeah.
we don't need to like check in. He'll be good with whatever. And then you're over there going, oh, I actually didn't want to do this thing, or I wasn't really going to agree to this, but now I have to. And so I think people, sometimes it probably is malicious, but a lot of times it's just people get used to the way that you are constantly, you haven't set boundaries and you haven't set expectations, so people just will say, oh, he's good with whatever.
Yeah.
And that's when I think the resentment can really start to build up, for a nice guy,
Hmm.
is everyone just kind of starting to walk all over me.
Yeah.
And the easy thing to do at that point is to just start getting mad and just say, oh, well, this isn't fair, or people are taking advantage of me. The harder thing to do, and the thing that we have to do, is recognize I'm part of this equation and I
Yeah.
haven't been the one to set those boundaries for myself. And that can be hard for you to do, and it can be hard for the people you have relationships with, because once you start setting those boundaries, then they start saying, hmm, okay, I used to just be able to, this person used to just drive me wherever whenever I needed them to. Now they're saying they're not going to do that anymore. Now
Hmm.
that person has to adjust to these changes that you've put into place.
Yeah.
But in the long term, it's going to be so much better for your own mental health, because
Hmm.
if you're constantly carrying this resentment where you feel like you're just now expected to do all these favors, you're expected to just go along with anything, you may ruffle some feathers once you make those changes. But it's far better than carrying that resentment for a long time, having these constant, angry blowups where people are just absolutely, dumbfounded, because you've always been the calm, nice guy, and then you're
Hmm.
having this crazy blow up,
Yeah.
and that's not good for anyone.
Yeah. Like,
What,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, my brother had also mentioned that he likened it to like a rabid dog. All right, like that. There's the escalation of force of setting up your boundaries and kind of talking about the blow up, right? If
Hmm.
a dog is all sweet for a really long time and all of a sudden just goes rabid, right? You're like, oh, he's like this is a crazy dog, right? You gotta handle that real quick, right? And sometimes violently, right? Um, versus if a dog, you step on its paw or its tail and it growls first, right? And then bites, right? Then you know that okay, you crossed a soft boundary or maybe a hard boundary, and then you continue to cross those boundaries, and then it slowly escalates rather than the all of a sudden blow up, and then now it's like okay, well now you might need to put that dog down, right? So I think that was a really good analogy that kind of like, oh, okay,
Yeah.
maybe I need to reevaluate how I set those boundaries.
Yeah. And that leads into the question I was going to ask you, which is,
Hmm.
how do you think people can start to set those boundaries? Because I know for
Hmm.
me, it was kind of scary to start doing that, because it was something I hadn't really done before.
Yeah.
And so just jumping into, okay, all of a sudden I'm gonna be setting boundaries on this, and this.
Hmm.
I couldn't do that initially. So
Yeah.
did you have any, early success
Hmm.
or thoughts on like how someone can get started doing that?
Sure. Well, to be honest, I'm still learning and practicing it
Me
myself,
too.
and
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe it's the blind leading the blind here, or I'm sorry, but um, yeah, I think it starts with affirming your place, right? And uh, how I can elaborate on that is that when you set a boundary, you're essentially creating a shape for yourself, right? And whether it's a box, a circle, whatever shape you want, you want to dictate is where you're setting the boundary. And when you communicate the boundary, and you might have to communicate it like three, four, five times before it actually sticks, especially with people like your family who have always known you to be, uh, a different way or be more agreeable. Um, that uh, yeah, there will be pushback. It's like, oh, well, you've always done this. It's like, well, I have, that has only hurt me. And to articulate that certain things, may not be suiting you today, it's like, how come they can agree that you don't need a baby bottle anymore to eat, yet they can't understand that this is an emotional growth thing, that, whatever the baby bottle was before is no longer serving you today.
Mm,
Um, and I use that example, like just saying, like, there was a point where I had training wheels on. There was a point where you needed to drive me everywhere. And now, I can drive, I can be financially successful myself. And these are the new things that I need as I grow as a person. And in order to have a fruitful relationship with me, that this is what is going to be necessary. Um, there was, hiccups along the way where there were blowups where, I felt that as I was revealing who I really am and my true self, that there was pushback. They were deeply concerned about my mental health at the time. And I was like, look, I'm the only one in this family who's gone to therapy. And if there's any indication that my therapist who has a PhD probably would have figured it out, not, I don't need you to, who have never gone, to diagnose me with anything, right? This is just how I am and how I want
yeah,
to be. I'm very more eclectic as a person. Uh, and this is what makes me happy is to be this way.
yeah,
There's nothing to be afraid of or anything. And I had multiple conversations like, when you did this to me, it made me feel like this. And I think that template has, I'm still practicing it, but it has helped me a lot. It's just like, you know, because you did this, I felt this, and I would like not to feel that way anymore. And this is how I envision it to look going forward. Um, and then, you can ask them for their feedback, but at least you've at least communicated, the new contract. It's no longer a hidden contract of, you're stepping on landmines around me. Um,
yeah,
it's that you do X, this is how it makes me feel, and let's not do that anymore.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. I like that. I think where it's probably toughest, I think, is with family because you
Yeah,
have long established patterns and
yeah,
habits with your family. And so breaking those, I think, is the probably the hardest because to your point, if you start to make some changes or set some boundaries, the response might be, well, we've always done it this way.
yeah,
And the response to that I like is, and that was great. But I have been recognizing recently that that pattern is no longer working for me because of these reasons, and I maybe it's taken me a little while to recognize that what we've been doing is no longer working for me.
yeah,
And you can point to countless examples. I mean, you could say, look, just because a company has always done things one way doesn't mean that it needs to keep being done that way, because a lot of times that's how things kind of stagnate and die
yeah.
for a company. A lot of times you need to evolve, you need to change. I think for you know that example you gave where you've been to therapy and the rest of your family members haven't is a good one, because for a lot of people they haven't been to therapy and they don't recognize that they are stuck in those patterns, and that some other member of the family might need to make some changes.
Hmm.
That can be hard for them because they're fighting their own you
Yeah,
know
of course.
emotional habits and things like that. So you're kind of breaking those for them, which is why they tend to push back a lot of the time. I've also found it effective to, if anyone's listening and wondering, well, how do I get started doing this, is just start small.
Hmm.
um, if you have something that's maybe important to you, like you want to stay consistent with like working out, let's just do something really simple, and you want to do it every day and you want to do it at a certain time every day because you're trying to build a pattern.
Hmm.
And maybe you want to do it first thing in the morning, but maybe that's when you used to have to do something for your family, and now you're saying, I have a goal, I want to work out at this time every day, that means I can no longer do this. And just start getting your family or whatever, whoever your relationship is with, that you're trying to do this, and build a small boundary
Yeah,
where it's like, okay, I'm clearly establishing this time frame. It's going to be from 7 to 8 in the morning or 8 to 9, whatever it is, and then that could start to branch out into things like your job too, where you're going to say, okay, I have, normally my boss expects me to stay late whenever he needs something done. Now I'm going to say, you know what? I have an exercise class or a workout that I am committed to. I'm going to be there. So, and that's at
Hmm.
6 p.m.
Yeah.
So I am not staying any later than I have to. That can start to help you build those barriers and those boundaries, and then you can kind of, as you get comfortable with that, maybe start setting new ones. But I found it's helpful to start small if you haven't done this type of thing before.
Yeah. Have you found that like I, for lack of a better term, like an excuse or having someone else relying on you or waiting on you has helped create those boundaries? Like, for example, like you use the your gym coach or your trainer
Hmm.
was essentially waiting on you at 6, so you literally cannot wait. You cannot stay at work or do
Yeah.
whatever other obligation any later than 6. You know?
Yeah, I think it's a great way to build those boundaries because if you've set up a meeting or something else that you've made a commitment to somebody else at a
Hmm.
specific time, that will make it a little easier to say, I need to go meet with this person because I've set that expectation. That means
Hmm.
I can't stay here any longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's a very helpful way to do it. You may even be the person that you're meeting. You could say that I'm
Yeah.
meeting somebody at
Yeah.
6 p.m.
Yeah.
and I have to be there. Maybe you're
Yeah.
meeting yourself
Yeah.
at the gym because you're trying to set that boundary. So,
And I found that like it helps disperse the accountability. You know, like I always found myself like creating like excuses or like reasons why I deserve to be able to go to the gym like that. And oftentimes I never had to actually use any of those. Most people are like, oh, you know, but it was just the this this anxiety that I built up in my head that, you know, that they're going to say no and I'm going to get, you know, handcuffed to the desk and I have to continue working or something, you know?
hmm
Um,
yeah,
and I think the other half was like to be able to affirm that, oh, that wasn't so bad, or oh, like see that, you know, you can do that again, and like nothing absolutely terrible is going to happen if you just start reinforcing those boundaries, and most people are pretty okay with that.
yeah. In fact, in some cases, they're more than okay with it, and they may actually respect you more for
Hmm.
being very upfront about your boundaries and
Yeah.
saying, I am doing this. This is my commitment. And people respect that. They say, okay, this is somebody who has strong principles. They know what their plans are, what their goals are, and they
Hmm.
are setting very clear timeframes around when they're going to be working on those things. Or I think in many cases there's actually a level of respect that can be built there because people don't generally respect somebody who is a pushover all the time,
Yeah.
especially in the workplace, but in relationships too. If you're just constantly being a pushover and not being the one to sort of say, hey, no, this is how I'm going to do things for these specific tasks or these specific goals that I have, then you just kind of become known as that pushover person. And
Yeah.
it has nothing to do with being nice or not. I think that's something I want to address too, is a lot of times people say, well, if I'm not going to be, I like being nice, I don't want to
Hmm.
not be nice anymore.
Hmm.
It's not about being nice or not. You can still be nice and have clear boundaries set.
Yeah.
The stereotype of the nice guy is more just what I see as like somebody who's constantly a pushover,
Hmm.
who's letting others set the expectations for you.
Yeah. Do you where do you think the whole people pleaser, like this need to want to like this need to be liked comes from?
Hmm. Yeah. Again, it's probably a little different for everybody, but um, I, speaking for myself first, I mean, definitely I use that as a defense mechanism. If I was being nice and accommodating, then I would assume that people would like me for doing that.
Hmm.
And as somebody who grew up kind of shy and quiet, I didn't have it within me to, um, kind of set the stage for myself, and I didn't have any confidence with who I really was, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And
Hmm.
so I found that if I could just be kind of nice and easygoing and accommodating, then people would like those qualities about me. And so that became kind of my default because I took me a long time to kind of figure out who I was. And so I kind of I guess I let other people determine who I was for me. Yeah. How about you?
I think the same. I think my parents immigrated to the U.S. really early, um, and Vietnamese refugees coming, and there was a lot of xenophobia at the time. So I think a lot of times they tried so really hard to blend in, be a chameleon.
Hmm.
It behooves you. Like my mom is excellent at sales because that's exactly what that is that you take that skill of becoming a chameleon, being well liked, and hone it into something that can be profitable for you. But I think there's the book The Joy Luck Club, and there's like this one of the moms. They're all playing mahjong and around the table, and there's like two generations. Like there's the first generation kids, and then there's the parents that immigrated over. And one of the parents is really insecure and has a lot of anxiety, and has a really tumultuous relationship with her daughter. And eventually it comes to head when the daughter gets old enough and has her own kid, that it's like, why did you like treat me the way that you did, and why couldn't you have given me confidence, why couldn't you have shown me love, growing up?
Hmm.
And the mom says, how could I give you anything that I didn't have myself? And
Hmm.
I think that that's similar. Where my parents, their survival mechanism was to be a chameleon, to blend in, be as Western as possible, and so they taught that was what helped them survive. So they taught me the same, where it's to be agreeable, and it didn't help that they kept on moving to more and more affluent neighborhoods, which tended to
Yeah.
be more
Yeah.
homogeneously white. um, so I always felt other. So it's like, how do I blend in as quickly as possible? Well, be a nice guy, be likable. It's the same effect how
Yeah.
you were saying that, you know I don't know who the heck I am. I'm a chameleon, so um, I'll just be nice.
Right.
Hmm.
Do you find, are your siblings similar to you, coming from, obviously the same background,
Yeah.
and being taught some of those same values from your parents, or did they take a different path?
My brother took a different path, and I think, in a lot of ways, I envy and look up to him in that way, because he knew exactly who he was very, very early on. And maybe it's because he also had, an additional mentor to look out for him.
Hmm.
Like, um, he already was able to see a path that was set out for him, and he often coincidentally or ironically followed in similar cadence with me. Like, we had ended up going to the same college, we had the same major, we actually had the same job after he graduated. We shared the same job, and then he eventually broke off and then did his own thing. But he's always known who he was and what he was interested in. I think his scope of what his interests is very, very narrow. um, but at least you knew exactly, like, getting Christmas presents for him is like the easiest thing. It's kind of the same thing within the same motif every single
Yep.
time. Versus me, I changed my outfits, I changed how I look every like 6 months. Uh, I have found joy in doing so, and found that that is actually who I am. But it definitely took a lot longer. Like, it wasn't until I probably turned 30 that I started to be like, okay, this is who I want to be from here on out, and this is
Hmm.
how I want to conduct myself.
Yep.
But until then, it's just, I was kind of a blob. It's like, external influences are always the ones just dictating where the edges of that blob were.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting. I always find the kind of nature versus nurture conversation interesting because I'm very much like my dad.
Yeah.
He is kind of that quote unquote nice guy as well, very
Hmm.
accommodating, conflict avoidant type of person, which
Sure.
I'm very much the same way.
Same.
But I also find, and funny enough, he was a middle child as well, and
Mm.
I was a middle child, and so some of that I think is instilled, and just in your upbringing, and then some of it may just be in you know, your inherent nature. That conversation I always find kind of interesting, just outside influences versus, because we don't have any kids ourselves, but you hear it from my siblings who have kids and
Hmm.
friends. It's just kids kind of, as they grow up, they really do become their own people, and you
Yeah.
you would think that two siblings would be very similar coming from the same household and
Hmm.
same parents, but oftentimes that isn't the case. And I always find it kind of interesting just where those qualities tend to come from and how a child might react differently to the same situation. You kind of unlocked a memory for me. We lived with our grandparents for a little while when we
Hmm.
were moving around, and my grandfather was very stern, never, very rarely smiled, never laughed. And so living in that household was very intimidating for me, where as we've been talking, I was thinking a little bit about this, and that was an environment where I really just wanted to be like hidden. Like I did not want to be, he would say, comments to me and things like that that just made me, very insecure. And so I did not want to be around him. I would almost want to like hide from him. We'd be at the dinner table all together, and I would just want to be like totally silent because I didn't want to draw any attention from him to like
Yeah.
get more of those comments. And I'm not sure if that was, that was one instance. We lived with them for, maybe 9 months or so, but that, so I can't say that situation was what completely influenced me to be the way that I am. Obviously I'm very similar to my dad, so I think there's some influence there too.
Maybe some
But
nerd
it's just
nature too.
interesting how a different child in my situation might respond differently. Maybe they'd lash out at their grandfather for, saying, mean things.
Yeah.
Whereas my reaction was to kind of like, okay, I'm gonna try to hide away from this situation.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just kind of an interesting to think about, like how we're all like raised and how our own, innate to who we are versus like outside influences.
Hmm.
Yeah.
What do you think
But
is like the single most, if you were to give like one solid tip to someone who is a current nice guy or a recovering nice guy, recovering people pleaser, what do you think that would be?
mhm. For me, the thing that helped the most was just recognizing that I was living under these hidden contracts.
Hmm.
So if you can just at least start recognizing when you're doing those things, like, oh, this girl that I've been talking to, I have been buying, her coffee, and I've been paying for everything, and I am interested in a relationship, but I don't know if she is. Recognizing, am I in that sort of pattern, or if maybe it's something with your family. Oh, my mom always expects me to do this thing, but I don't like to do it, and I'm an adult now,
Yeah.
but I've always just done it because that's the way I've always done it. Just start to recognize that when those covert contracts or hidden contracts, when you're maybe stuck in those, because then you can start saying, how can I do this a little bit differently?
Yeah.
What could I do to maybe start setting a small boundary in this situation, and then go from there? Because just immediately saying, okay, I'm blowing up everything and I'm going to set boundaries for everything might not be the path for everybody.
Hmm.
So start small and work your way up from there would be my advice. What about you? What's worked best for you?
I think, yeah, recognizing about the covert contracts, and then if you want to be nice, and that's something that you want as a, core tenet within your own life, is just recognizing that love is to be given, right? And I keep on coming back to that because that's really wrong true for me because love creates abundance. Fear creates like scarcity because when you are afraid that you won't get enough and you're trying to hoard things, and that's kind of what I found within myself is that I wanted to, I was afraid that I wouldn't get my needs met. So I would just throw a bunch of love and love bomb people to try to get what I wanted. But then that creates a vacuum within myself because like, obviously that takes energy to give energy. Um, and in doing so, that creates a vacuum either within myself, and then when I blow up on other people, that creates a vacuum in other people too. If you just give love freely, then it creates abundance because then other people's needs are met. you're not technically dipping into it yourself because you're not creating resentment. Uh, and then obviously communicating your own needs often because you're worth it. To have your needs to be heard, to be seen, and to be met.
Yeah. That's a really nice message. And one final question I'll ask for you
Hmm.
is I think for a lot of guys, just being able to say to themselves that I do deserve love, I do deserve respect, I do
Hmm.
deserve these things. It can be a hard message to accept about yourself. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on maybe somebody who's been telling themselves a message that, oh, I'm not
Hmm.
good enough, I don't deserve these things. How do you get out of that mindset to a point where you can start accepting those things about yourself?
I think the movie or book, The Perks of Being a Wallflower, kind of resonate
Hmm.
there, where
Yeah.
we only can receive the love we think we deserve, and it comes with self-love and compassion towards yourself. Because if you think you're unworthy of love, then even if someone gives you love, you'll never receive it as that. You'll always spin it as something negative, or that maybe they have an ulterior motive, or maybe they're trying to get something out of me. Um, and I think if you tell yourself constantly that you are worthy, and you give yourself love, you also create a template for other people to show you the same love. Um, so whether it is having a date with yourself or going to the gym with an obligation to you to go to that gym, or watch that movie alone. Go to a movie theater by yourself and show you, like, because you wanted to watch it, or play the video game that you wanted to do, or take on that hobby that you've always put on the back burner because you're always doing
Hmm.
something for someone else. Um, these are all ways that you can show yourself love. And if you make a mistake and you mess up, then you have to give yourself grace so that you don't build resentment for yourself either. And I think in doing so, it kind of creates a channel so that other people can say, "Oh, these are ways that this person loves themselves." Well, like, and I kind of go back to my brother. It's like he's really into World War II, and he makes that very obvious. Like any chance he can go to like a museum about World War II, he does it, and without asking anyone else. And if he has to go by himself, he will. But now it makes it very obvious, like, oh, that is the thing that he's interested in, and by loving himself and doing the thing that he wants to do, he's also showing a boundary in a very soft manner to other people, like, oh, well, if you want to make him happy, just show interest in World War II.
And that's probably a good way to start setting boundaries too. Is like if there's
Yeah.
something you really love to do, something you know that you're passionate about, or something you think you might be passionate about,
Hmm.
like you said, a new hobby, and you find that that is one thing that you recognize as very important to you. That's a
Yeah.
great way to start setting boundaries too. Is
Hmm.
like your brother does. Hey, I don't care if anyone else is going with me.
Yeah.
I don't care that we were supposed to go do this. I love World War II, and I'm going to this museum.
Yeah.
I'll go by myself if I have to.
Yeah.
And then you start creating these new patterns, and people adjust very quickly to them. They say, oh,
Hmm.
okay, Bob is now doing this, that's and people will in most cases adjust to it. And if they don't, that's a whole probably a whole nother conversation to have. But that may just be a relationship you have to consider. Well, why are they not allowing me to be the person I want to be? Why are they
Yeah.
not allowing me to do the things that I enjoy, or the things that I know are going to make me a better person?
Hmm.
So it just at least gives you something to think about when it comes to that relationship.
And you
So
might meet people or see new opportunities that pertain to the things that you like. I think in
absolutely.
embracing what you love or loving yourself opens those doors.
Yeah.
So
Well,
yeah,
I think that's probably a good place to close out for today.
agreed.
It's great conversation.
Yeah,
I enjoy doing these slightly different, topics and diving more into mental health and
yeah,
things like
agreed.
that.
Same.
Other things that are very important for men. So,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
look
Thanks for bringing
forward
this tough
to
topic up.
our
Yeah,
next one, and Thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yeah, thanks everyone.